We request everyone to have the meeting as interactive as possible, and sir would like that as well. So you can use the chat section, but we would request you to mute your mics at the moment so that the recording will be pretty cool. All right, thanks. Sir, you may get started. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope you are safe. I'll be starting off with a true story. The year was 1981. And there was a printer which had a problem. The problem was in the queuing mechanism of the printer. And if 3 or 4 guys gave their print from different computers, the job was not respected, as in the prints were getting mismatched or getting executed even before the first one got completed. And there was this scruffy hacker who looked into the source code and modified the printer so that the queuing system works fine. Later on, there was an advanced version of the printer, model 9700 to be precise, which also had a similar problem. And the hacker wanted to look into the source code, modify the source code, and then make it better. All this was happening in the artificial labs at MIT. And the company that produced the printer and didn't provide the source code for 9700, so it could be modified and the issue could be fixed, was this company. Any guess what this company is? Okay, it's Xerox. So in 1983, the same person who tried to modify the source code of Xerox and didn't really get the source, rather Xerox denied him to modify the source and basically fix the printer. Hello?
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, you guys are able to hear me?
Yeah, we're able to hear you.
Yeah. So in 1983, he decided to quit his job from the artificial intelligence lab in MIT, and he started a project called GNU. GNU is a recursive acronym for GNU. GNU is not Unix. And then he also wrote the GNU C compiler. Later, he made this wonderful editor called Emacs, and also started Free Software Foundation. And he also coined this term and started Copyleft. Most of you would have heard about copyright, but he started Copyleft, where copying and sharing was an act of law. And then he created the GNU General Public License, a way of licensing software with FSF in mind. And then we had lunch together. This is just a shameless plug of me, where I met him in one of the universities. And I also was maintaining his server for a few years. And he's a great personality, and he's really good with puns. And if you have used the rm command in your GNU Linux platform, he is also the co-author of rm, of course, GCC, Emacs, and all of the rest, whatever I mentioned. Any guess who this personality is?
Is he Richard Stallman?
Yeah, he's Richard Matthew Stallman. Yes, the father of FSF. So what is free software altogether? Free as in free speech, not free beer. Free as in freedom. And I would like to have this call to be more of a conversation, so you can talk as and when you want. And you could also ping your questions in the chat area if needed. All right. Before explaining what is free software all about and what is the freedom in it, I would like to take this example. Whenever I try to explain free software, I take this example of bisibelebath, a traditional South Indian dish. Have you heard of bisibelebath?
No, sir, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, so it's worth giving it a try if you haven't. It's one of the traditional dish, and it could also be like, probably you could call it any other rice dish, or say sambars, or any other Indian traditional dish. We really don't know who the authors of that dish is, do we? Can you name, say for example, roti or naan, or like Navratna Kurma, for example? Do we really know who the author of that recipe is?
Not really.
Not really. We just enjoy eating.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we don't know who really made it. They didn't really take any patent or said, hey, didn't take any copyright over it. But most of us know the recipes out there. And so you might have your own recipe and your friend might have his or her own recipe. And then you guys exchange your recipe. You could read the recipes and you modify the recipe. You create your new recipe. Probably you can add some extra things to it, or probably remove new ingredients or add some extra ingredients and make a version 2.0 out of that recipe. And you are free to share it around, and there is no restrictions unless and until like you maintain a few of the things. Like you took it from your friend, maybe you would want to mention that, hey, I took this recipe from my friend and I modified it to make it better or make it a different version. That is a classic example of what a free software is. So it basically comes with 4 freedoms. The first freedom is freedom to run the program as you wish for your own purpose without any restrictions. And the second freedom is freedom to study. We basically call it like freedom 0 and freedom 1, starting with 0 index. And the freedom to study, like how the program works, and you could want to change it as per your convenience. That means the source code should be open and accessible to one and all. And freedom 2 is to redistribute those copies to anybody whom you like. And freedom 3 is the freedom to distribute copies of modified versions. As in the example I noted, like you pick up the recipe and modify the recipe and then share it with others, right? So these are the fundamental freedoms of free software. So free as in not like free meal or free beer or buy one get one free. It's more like your freedom to express and carry all these fundamental freedoms along with. So any software that provides these freedoms is known as free software. So in parallel, Richard Stallman and his team were working on this operating system called as Herd, with the philosophy of having an operating system which is completely free and with all the philosophy of free software. While this is happening, there was a gentleman in Finland who wrote a mail to all the Linux users saying that, hey, I'm kind of doing an operating system, like I'm currently using Bash and I'm using GCC to compile that operating system. And it is not like a really big, like a huge project plan, like Herd or something, or GNU. In fact, basically it's just a pet project. I'm just doing it for fun. Do you guys want to join and write some code for this? Can anybody guess what this OS was and what it became? Or rather, we could start with who wrote this mail.
I'm not sure, but is this Linux, like Mint OS?
Mint OS. Okay, let's see. That's a pretty close guess. I think you guys know this person.
Yeah, Linus Torvalds.
Yeah, Linus Torvalds. So he, his pet project was Linux. So if you noticed in this whole story, Linux wouldn't have been possible if there weren't a key component. If I can go back to the mail and highlight, can you find which the key component was? It was GCC, right? Without the GNU C compiler, forget the GNU C compiler. Let's talk about any source code which should be compiled. Like without a compiler, would it be possible to execute that function execute that program? Not really, right? So you would need a compiler basically for a program which needs to be compiled so that it can be executed. So without the GCC, the GNU C compiler, Linux wouldn't have been possible. So the father of free software alludes that you suggest that you call it as GNU Linux rather than just Linux, because both of them share equal responsibility and one couldn't be present without the other. So one important thing that we could remember, and it will be great if you can share it with everybody, is to call it GNU Linux rather than just Linux. That's where the GNU and the Linux. So open source and free software. So on the flyer that was created on a few of the social media about this talk, it was mentioned as open source. Then I requested a few of your friends who was organizing this to call it as free and open and not just open source. So let's basically try to understand what is the free and open source. What does free means in free software as we saw the freedoms, and what does just open source mean? Let's see an example. How many of you know what this icon is?
A Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, is it a free software or an open source software?
I guess it's a free software.
Okay. Anyone else guessing it to be an open source? So why do you think it's a free software?
Basically because it is available for free, not that only, plus I guess
Is it free and also open source?
I think
don't
it's
think
both.
it's open source because we don't get access to the source code of this application and we cannot modify it as per our need.
yes, that is one point.
Yeah, you do get the access to the source code. It's on GitHub, VS Code. But
yeah, I think we can modify it. Like it's open, like on GitHub as well. We can do some pull requests. So and we can also download it. So I think it's both of them.
It can't be both. It can be either. So it's not free software, as our friend mentioned, not just because it is free. Any software is called as free software, as I mentioned, if it adheres to all those freedom which we spoke about, right? And we were trying to understand the difference between free and open source. So this is a classic example. So few of them think it is free, few of free software, few of them think it's an open source software. And let's see what it is. So it is basically an open source software. As one of them mentioned, the code is available, but you may not do the below. So this is the restriction that the license puts on the software, and that kind of breaks the freedom rule, right? So it doesn't allow you to modify and redistribute it. So you can't reverse engineer it or decompile or disassemble the software. You can't remove, minimize, block, or modify any notices of Microsoft. And few things like you can't use it against the law or share, publish, or rent or lease the software or provide other standalone offerings of the same code. So this kind of makes it a free or open now. What does it make it?
It makes it free but not open.
Yeah, so it is open source basically. So there's a difference between a free software and open source software, and what you guys are thinking about a freeware, which is a completely different domain, and there's this proprietary code, the proprietary software. So freeware is basically where you think like it's free, as in the free buy one get one free kind of a thing, but the freedom of the free software basically comes with those freedoms where you can read the code, modify, edit, and redistribute. And open source is basically the code is available online. So VS Code, you could still go to github.com, Microsoft/VS Code, but it would be in a particular license which has some restrictions. And when those restrictions are applied, it doesn't make it a free software as per the philosophy. So it becomes an open source software. Are you kind of clear on this?
Yes, sir. Why do the companies then publish their software as like an open source?
Yeah.
Because then if you can change it, then there's no point in.
Great question. So as you said, you or the other person, I forget the name. They said like, hey, you could still send pull requests, or you could still, create issues on GitHub. That's the great advantage of open sourcing piece of software, right? So that's why companies open source it. So thereby the contribution is huge, and the community is active on making the product better. So if it's very much confined to a company, say if VS Code wasn't available as an open source project, and Microsoft made it proprietary, all the responsibility would be on Microsoft. So if there is any new feature request, or if there is any bug or a security vulnerability or any issue, or you need a new plugin or a new feature, the sole responsibility would be Microsoft. But now it's open source. People can view the source, right? But still stick to this license. Thereby, it's the third one. The second important one is remove, minimize, block, or modify any notices of Microsoft. So basically, the piece of software is still belongs to Microsoft, but people who are not working in Microsoft can contribute to it, make it better, work on issues, and they also have this plugin community where you could, publish extensions for VS Code, and it grows better, and it's kind of a community experience.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like sharing all the features with others so that they can also add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So any guess who this guy is? So he is one of the core initiators of open source movement. His name is Eric S. Raymond. So Eric S. Raymond wrote this article called Cathedral and the Bazaar, which was like the initiation point of the open source movement. So let me explain what the article speaks about. So he says the software development can happen in two different ways, basically. One is the Cathedral way of developing the software, the other one is the Bazaar. In Cathedral, there is a hierarchy, like whenever a piece of software is coded, it goes through review, it goes through a ladder, and the person at the top of the ladder makes the decision on what needs to go in or what not. And everybody sticks on to that particular paradigm, like a cathedral. In a Bazaar, what really happens is there are a lot of different kinds of features and software available on a flat hierarchy, and the person who wants to shop basically goes and picks whatever piece of code or software he wants, and probably goes home and makes his own stuff, right? So he says a Bazaar kind of a setup is really good for open source, and that's how basically open source work. And that's a classic example where he quotes about how proprietary is more like a cathedral, where there is a group or a head who is like deciding what the feature is and how the software should go on. And Bazaar is more like a flattened hierarchy where people are open for discussion and they can exchange ideas, and they can buy what they want. So are you able to relate this to the software now? The Cathedral and the Bazaar way of doing things?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, that was his article which kicked off the open source revolution. And then RMS says, if you want to have freedom, the only way of having it while using computer is by rejecting proprietary software. And that's the aim of free software movement, so that the word can live in freedom. So how, if you can do a count, like how many of you guys are using GNU Linux, or like what's your experience on GNU Linux? Like what are the different flavors of Linux if you have used? Can you name a few?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've used the basic one, the Ubuntu, and the Kali Linux.
Nice.
Okay, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Sayan, go ahead.
I mostly use Manjaro Linux.
Sorry?
I mostly use Manjaro Linux.
Yeah.
I use Manjaro Linux. Manjaro.
Manjaro, okay, yeah, your voice broke. Cool. So, do you think Ubuntu is a free software?
Yes, I think.
Yes, sir, it is. I think so.
Yeah, it is not a free software. So why? Because you could go and read an article wonderfully articulated by RMS. You can just Google for Ubuntu as non-free software. And the major cause is it ships a lot of
Okay, sir.
binaries which are proprietary. Like it ships Flash, for example. It's used to ship Flash. Flash is anyway going to be dead, but there are many other MP3 like decoders, encoders, which are all like only binaries. So you don't really get the source there. So it's not really a free software. But it rapidly grew by how it marketed itself, and how they were shipping free CDs at the initial days, and it kind of made its name. It's worth giving a try on Arch Linux or Debian, and you could also download Herd and try to look how Herd was, right? So Debian is pretty good in terms of adhering to the free software philosophy. You might be wondering, why am I talking all this? How is it even like related to you, right? The idea is to get the philosophy right. Before we do anything, we need to really know what we are doing and why we are doing it. Now let us take a guess or try to count how many free software, or like say to the convenience, like free and open source software are we using. I would rather call it free software, but maybe few of you are just using free open source and not free. So can you just like randomly look at your applications and see how many of them are? Say,
Sir, is Docker free software?
it is open source, I guess. We have to check the license. It is open source. It's not free.
Okay, it's not free.
Yeah, because I think as far as I remember, it is licensed with MIT.
Okay.
And so say around 5 to 6 of them, which you can see.
So VLC is an open source software.
Yes, VLC, Mozilla Firefox,
Yes.
Firefox,
Mozilla Firefox, yes, it's free.
and Inscript.
Yes.
There's also OBS, like the recording software. I think that's also free.
Nice. So out of the few which you named, to how many did you contribute? As in created an issue, sent a PR, or modified the source code, played around, or modified the documentation, things like that.
I only played around with VS Code,
Yeah.
with the documentation, just that.
Okay, so like 1 or less than 1?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay. Yeah, that's the point. So like this was me like few years ago when I was trying to commit to different free and open source softwares on GitHub. And I kind of did a streak for 500 days and then like dropped the graph as my son was born, and my daily commits were on him. So there are a few things that I learned, and I would share my experience while I was contributing daily to free and open source. And these are few of my projects on GitHub, which have good amount of stars and contributions from people from different parts of the world. Especially the Git tips and the functional programming jargons have got translated to like 12 or 13 different languages, and it's still a great journey with free and open source. And I was pretty much very active on Node, like I was publishing on NPM, and this is like how the graph looks on per day for number of people who are downloading the different modules I've published. Kind of dropped around bit and
So I just
yeah,
have a question in this section. Actually, I'm pretty interested to like contribute, But isn't this like you have to, first thing is you have to know the whole thing, like you have to know a lot about what you're contributing towards, and then the second thing is like if you contribute, doesn't that if that thing doesn't work out properly, doesn't that break the whole software or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. We will be covering as we proceed.
Okay.
And get back to me if I miss something, right?
Sure.
Awesome. So the kinds of this will give you an adrenaline rush and keeps you happy while contributing to free and open source. So the core principles or the core things which you basically learn when writing free and open source software is to make a software like maybe generic, but you could learn more about the functionality, simplicity, the robustness, and like benchmarking, documentation, like even peer-to-peer communication and things like that. The few things that we need to get ourselves very clear in terms of terminology is like who are the users and the contributors and maintainers in terms of free software. So users are basically the end users. It can be anyone who is using the piece of software, who is not really worried about the code or how it really works, but really enjoys using it. And contributors are the ones who kind of try to tinker with the code, create issues, and say create bug reports and things like that. And maintainers are folks who are really into the project, who decides what features needs to go in, takes care of the release, creates the release note, says, hey, this is the new feature and these are the things that went in this release, and they'll decide what to go in and what not. And they're more like gatekeepers. So basically we have users, contributors, and maintainers. Hope this part is clear. Okay, let's get started with our FOSS journey. So basically you can get into contributing in 3 different ways. You could create a new project, or you could create an alternative project to an existing project, or you could join an existing project. Step 1 is selecting, right? What are we trying to select here? So basically each of you guys here might be interested in different programming languages. Say in this case, in the screenshot I just took, the interest here is JavaScript. So if you basically go to GitHub and go to trending, you could filter each of the trends by the programming language you're interested in, and this would sort out the projects which are trending maybe today or weekly or month and yearly basis, and you could look into the top projects. This is one of the way of selecting the project you're interested to work in so that you can contribute. Step 2 is Readme. It's about reading the documentation. So any of the top projects which you notice would have this file called readme.md, which is more like a markdown file which explains about what the project is all about. Here's an example of Yeoman. Yeoman is one of the projects where I'm a part of a core team, which is an open source project by Google for scaffolding your web applications. So this is a README. It talks about what Yeoman is, how we could contribute to it, and all of it. So basically, all of those top projects would have a README, which basically talks about what this project is about, what are the different features it has, how we can install it, how do you test it, and how there's a contribution guidelines. If you want to contribute, what are the things you want to do, or if you want to send, if you want to modify the code and you send a pull request. I'm not sure if your guys are used to GitHub and Git. What's your experience with Git or GitHub in general? Do you understand what a pull request is?
Yes, I've used it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good.
Yes, sir. Using it for last few months.
Nice. Awesome. So basically, a pull request is, if I want to put it in an easier way, say suppose you download the source code of a particular project you're interested to modify, and then you modify some piece of the code. Now you need to put that code into the main software, right? Because whatever changes you made is on your local. So basically, you push all the changes to GitHub and then create a request to the maintainers saying that, hey, this is my change, please take it in. And that request is basically a pull request. Step 3 is read the source. So basically, you should go and read the source to understand. Now you have read the documentation in step 2. You know, you will probably would have understood on a higher level what the architecture of the software is, how it works and all. But now you have to get your hands dirty and you have to download the source code. Like basically, if you're on GitHub, it's git clone. You're cloning the software, you're cloning the repo, and then you're opening the source code and trying to make sense out of it, understanding, reading it. It's always good to start with test cases, so it's a good practice, so you'll know what parts of the code is being touched by this test and what is expected as a result. So you'll be able to quickly grasp the flow and understand the particular flow. So basically, this is how you'll be cloning it. If you go to GitHub, you'll see clone or download, and if you have Git on your machine, you can just say git clone followed by the Git URL, so you could get the source code on your machine. Step 4 is picking an issue. So basically, now you have read the documentation, you have the source code, you have read the source code, you kind of have a good idea about how things are working. Now you'll probably pick up an issue, or you have a feature in your mind and you probably want to, get that feature in. So you'll go and check if someone already has created an issue. Issue basically on GitHub is like, hey, something is not working, or hey, I would need this feature on this software. So these kind of things are known as issues, and you could go and search for issue and see if someone already has a request what you are trying to add as a feature, or you found a bug and you want to fix that bug. Is that bug already identified, or is someone working on that? All these questions will be answered on the issues. So you'll basically try to pick up an issue on which you can work. So one of the good ways to find an easy issue is to go to these top projects and go to the label field and search for good first issue. So good first issues basically are the first easy to handle and easy to fix kind of an issue. It is beginner friendly, and normally good maintainers or top projects would have marked their issues with good first issue, right? And also, if you can go to GitHub and go to topics, you can go by this topic called as good first issue, and it goes through multiple repositories and show you like what are all the good first issues you have. Step 5 is figuring out how do you fix it. So far things are clear.
Yes, sir, it's pretty understandable. So can you also talk like in the good first issue, like there's a label. So is there any other labels which are beginner friendly? Because there was a event called Hacktoberfest which promotes all this open source contribution. So there you get lots of different labels. So are there any other labels which are beginner friendly?
It depends on the project, but generally, as a general practice, good first issue is one thing. As you said, when those kind of hacks happen, right? Normally, people who want to surface their issues will mark with the tag that the hack is, saying people to go and apply the label for. So whatever they suggest, normally people will add it. But good first issue is a standard, or probably you can look into some of them would be like easy, or if you just go into the label, right, it will give you a list of labels, so you can by the label you'll be able to figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So fixing it basically would involve you to, depends on what kind of an issue you're trying to fix, or are you creating a new feature. In that term, like you should like have a detailed description on your pull request saying, hey, this is the new feature I'm trying to integrate or introduce, and these are all the things that the PR is bringing in. And rather than diving yourself and to the code and like taking and making changes and sending a PR, it is advised to create an issue, discuss and get consensus with the maintainers, and probably they would have already considered it, or they might be interested to see what you can bring into the table, and then you will get an idea. But it's still okay, like if you can tinker with code, but if you're really serious about getting your PR merged into the main code, then you have to discuss with all the maintainers to get a clear picture on what needs to be changed, or is this change even necessary, or will the change be accepted. That's the figuring out part. And you'll fix it by sticking to the contribution guidelines, and PRs normally would have templates which would ask you a set of questions that you need to fill, which would sometimes be very detailed for a few projects. And then you'd of course have to write test cases and all the other checks that needs to go in the CI/CD, as in the continuous integration and deployment, where your code would be built and tested on few of the benchmarks. Like some of them might say like, hey, my unit test coverage should not go below my benchmark, so I would reject your PR if it goes below that. And there are certain checks and balances. Each project differs, but when all those things are met, your PR is kind of green, and then the maintainers would say, hey, this looks like a good feature, and they would probably merge it. So far, so good?
Yes, sir. Enjoying it.
Yes.
Understanding.
Yeah. So people might say, hey, look, it's all good reading the source and sending PR, but are there any alternative paths? Well, yeah, of course. You can start your own project. No one's stopping you from that. You can go to github.com, create a new repo or create a new organization, and you could start working on it. If people like it, someone else who likes your idea might join in, and you have a lot of maintainers and collaborators and users. And it can be anything. It can be a simple idea. It can be a huge project, or it can be an hello world to start off with. No one's stopping you from doing that, right? You might like, yeah, but are we still missing something? Yeah. So you might not be comfortable with code, right? Not everybody are comfortable with code, or you might not be even comfortable with creating your own project. But do you like planning events?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah, that's good. So you can start creating Hackfest free software hackathons, and probably create some kind of a conference, and the one you're doing right now, like a webinar. Yeah, these kind of things will really help the free software community, right? Do you like to design? There might be few
Yes.
who are like good at artwork and good at designing. You can go ahead and contribute logos. You can go ahead and contribute like the pictures in the Readme, for example, the human which I showed you, or you could go ahead and create icons and fonts, and there are no barriers on what you could go and create in design. And there are many projects which are looking out for designers, and it would be a great contribution.
Awesome.
Do you like to write?
Yes, I write a lot.
Yeah, that's good. So you can start with creating documentations, look into projects, read the documentation, and say, hey, I can write it better, or I can structure this even more better, right? Then you can go and do a PR to the documentation and say like, hey, I've restructured the entire documentation to look more better and easy to understand. No one's stopping you from doing that. And you don't really have to crack your head on what really not is your forte. So if you're into writing, of course, you could still contribute. Do you like to organize things? Few of them are.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if you really like organizing things, you can go and look at all the issues and say, hey, I would like to label all the issues. I would like to sort it out. I would like to create this as the first, or the easy PR to fix, or I want to label this as own fix or duplicate. So you could go and organize the entire issues, right? No one like really stopping you on that too. Do you like to help people? Who doesn't like to?
Absolutely.
Yeah, surely.
Yeah.
A lot, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So if you like to help people, then you can get on to Stack Overflow. You can get on to GitHub issues, see what people are trying to face and try to help them out. You can go on to IRC. You can also start a blog, or you can start a tweet thread and start helping out people on whatever they're trying to look for, or whatever you think you have expertise in, right? So there are different ways to contribute to free and open source software. Basically, it need not be just code and programming. So you might be asking, like, what can I do right away, right? So I would like to also say that there are few contributors who I've noticed who are like lawyers and doctors, and they were not even like into tech world, right? So so you guys are in your final year, is it?
We are a third year, so I
Third.
guess there are lots of other years as well
Okay.
here.
So you're from different streams, or are you all like from the same stream?
From the same stream.
That's like
So
computer
it's
science?
like computer science and information technology. So both.
Yeah, both are like almost similar. Yeah. Cool. So what can you do right away? I would suggest to do something like this, which I've tried and it has really helped us even in our college days. So basically, start with stage 0, just like ideation phase. So all of you guys, the like-minded folks, you sit in a room and start ideating on different aspects what we spoke about. May it be like design, documentation, or coding, or like organizing, and all of this, right? So create an idea list or have a shared document where you can just keep populating that document with ideas. And stage 1, you create groups. So what happens when you create ideas, you will get clarity on what each person in the team is interested. And then you start creating groups, saying some people want to get into the code part, some people want to get into the design, some to the organization and things like that. So different groups have been formed on stage 1, and you have a better clarity on what the team strengths and capabilities are. And stage 2 is where you create a leader for each group. So because there must be one person who can be responsible for the entire group, right? So you kind of create leaders for each groups, and those leaders will help in churning out projects, publishing it, like even maybe marketing it, creating beautiful documentation or maintaining GitHub, depends on what your group is basically heading towards. And stage 4 basically is go to stage 0. So what was stage 0?
The ideation.
Yeah, good. So it repeats. So you go back to stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So how do you make this interesting? Doesn't it seem to be boring to keep doing the same thing again and again? So to make it interesting, what you could do is within the group, like create a scoreboard for each individual and say, hey, in this group, this individual contributed like 80 times to different projects in the past 15 days. So probably he get a treat or he gets some points, and whoever creates the maximum number of points at the end of the say month would get some badge or goodie, or you guys decide as a group. So this kind of keeps the game going. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah,
that
this
sounds
sounds
interesting.
cool.
Yeah. So basically that's me. You can find me on h3man.com or hemanth.dev, and I'm at Gnumanth on Twitter. And like I contribute to many free and open source software. And I used to run this thing called Node Module of the Week, which I recently killed. And gsfeatures.in is a progressive web app where I talk about all the latest JavaScript features. And I also am the community leader at DuckDuckGo and Google Developer Expert for web and payments, and a member of Node.js Foundation and TC39 delegate. TC39 is the technical community which decides the future feature of JavaScript. So we work on proposals and we decide what are the future features of JavaScript basically. And that's it for me in terms of presentation. We can get on to GitHub, and I could help you on creating the organization and things like that, if you don't have any questions.
Yes, I do. That's like a lot of achievements. But okay, so there's a question in the chat actually. So it's by Abhishek. He says, what happens when I copy someone's open source code and change it a little and don't give him or her credits at all? Can the person sue me or blame me in any way?
Yes, that's a good question. They can depends on what their license basically is. So there are different license from very stringent licenses to people saying, hey, I don't care what you do with my code. You can just go ahead and do whatever you want. And some of the license says, hey, if you are modifying my source code, then you have to mention, because I still have copyrights on it. So you have to say, hey, this part of code is picked up from this piece. So that's a very good question. And there are many cases in history where people violated few of the licenses, and they were later sued for few many things. So it's a very good practice to basically look into what the license is and what are the constraints that the license have. There is an cool tool called TLDR license, which basically makes it easy for you to look into the constraints of a license. So if you aren't into reading huge documentations, like licenses are not like just one-liners, right? It will have a lot of information in it, and somewhere there might be a clause. So it's always good to know what you're picking up, and then in huge companies there are.
Hello, I think
yeah.
your voice is breaking.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, it's audible.
Yeah, in few companies they have proprietary tools which basically does what the person asked for. I forget his name. So
He's Abhishek.
Abhishek, yes, Abhishek. So basically, there are few proprietary tools. There are few free software tools also. But what that tool basically does is it goes through the entire code base and try to figure out like what portion of the code was copy pasted from some particular. First figures out what part of the code is copy pasted, and then tries to figure out from where this piece of code could have been extracted. So not just copy paste, but rather it will try to analyze your entire source code and say, hey, look, this piece of code is basically picked up from this piece of software, which belongs to this license. So you should probably be careful or give it a mention or talk about the copyright, right? So there are a lot of MNCs take care of this, because somewhere down the line they might bite the bullet. Hope that answers your question.
I think so. Okay, so I have another question myself. So like when you like try to contribute to any other project, so the first thing is like to fork the repository, right? So when you like specify in your resume that you have done some kind of project and you give like a GitHub, your GitHub repo link, like the link to your personal projects. So that project which you have forked from some other organization or where you have contributed, that is also there in your particular repository, like in your profile. So does that like act as like, should we delete that after we contribute that particular repo from our profile, or should we like keep it? Does that matter?
Yeah, but you need not delete that, because whoever is trying to go through your GitHub and look into what you have done, right, would basically go to repositories, and repositories would be in that repositories. You could go and filter and say, hey, just show me the repository which belongs to this author, right? So
okay.
Yeah, so in basically if you go to the tabs, I'll try to quickly share my screen, just a second. All right, I think you're able to see it.
Yeah, I can see.
So here, if you go to type and say sources, this would be all the projects that I have created, right? So
okay.
Now I could say, hey, show me only the forks. So these are all the things that I have forked.
Oh, so there's like a filter. Okay.
Yeah, so it's easy for that.
Okay, thank you.
So any other questions?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can you give some insight about the Google Summer of Code and Google Summer of Doc program to the participants?
Yeah, sure. So in my college days, I was also selected for the Google Summer of Code, but I didn't really pursue it for various reasons. And one of my ideas was ants and algorithms, kind of try to learn from how ants communicate and create an algorithm. That was an idea. But if you were to take part in Google Summer of Code, and I would also suggest in the Google Code Jam, it's worth spending your time on that. So how basically Google Summer of Code works is like there are different free and open source projects which are looking out for bright chaps whom they can pick up and they can say, hey, you can work with us for some time and we could work on your idea. So if you are interested, you could go through the list of projects that are paired up with this program, and then you could say, for example, you want to contribute in GNOME, and GNOME would have been listed there, and you should be in a state where you've understood GNOME to a very decent level, and then you pitch your idea saying, hey, in GNOME, I think there is some feature that's kind of missing, and I would like to add this feature, and this is my idea. And there will be mentors who are part of the Google Summer of Code, and if they find your idea good, they'll kind of mail you and kind of have more detailed discussions with you, and then if your idea gets approved, you're on the list, and then you could go ahead and work and contribute to that project, and of course your name would be mentioned as one of the contributors in that project. There are many such projects. Code Jam is one of the coding competitions that Google held, and there is also this lead code and different variants. So it's worth spending your time on things like that, because you can get to learn from brighter minds. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there is another question in the chat. It says, how do small contributions take care of the licenses? Wouldn't it be a hectic job if one doesn't know much about licenses at least?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll try to quickly share my screen again. So basically, GitHub and a few other platforms which help you to host softwares would give you this feature which says add license, right? You see this?
Yeah.
So with add license, you can see what are the different variants of licenses available. And the other one that I mentioned was TLDR, this site, where you could go ahead and look into whatever license you want, and say, for example, let's go for GNU General Public version 3, and it says you can do these, you can't do this, you must do this, right? So now you go and create your new repository and you add your license, whatever license you want. For example,
so we should like have a basic idea about all the licenses.
Yes, it's great if you have basic idea, but for the detailed idea, like this site is pretty good because it tries to summarize the entire license, and licenses are like pretty huge to read, right? If you go to full text, it'll like be pretty huge to read. This is just fine, but mighty, and if you can't really make out what you can, what you can't, and what you must, right? By just reading the text, it's hard if you're not used to it. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, so I think there are no more questions.
Awesome. I would really like to thank you guys for organizing this, Manish and team. And please don't stop. Go ahead doing more interesting work and try to contribute. We could probably end the recording here, and I'll help you guys explain this organization and how you could create that leaderboard and things like that.
All right, sure, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Thank you.